Go ahead and get started. This meeting probably won't be that long tonight. I don't know, maybe 45 minutes, maybe an hour. We'll wait and see. So I'm going to give you the code, the first code, right out of the gate. So make a note of this, because remember, at the end of these Zoom meetings, you get your free 15 points by taking the little quiz. If you miss the meeting, or you miss any of these Zoom meetings, be sure and watch the recording of the meeting, which is in the modules section. And you can watch it there and take the quiz anytime. But I noticed a number of people haven't taken several of the quizzes, even though the recordings are still there. They're open the entire class. So if you miss, say you missed this meeting, you could take the quiz all the way up until the end of the class. I mean, if you wanted to, but I think it's easy to take the quiz, because if you miss the meeting, you watch the recording, you can actually fast forward through the recording and find the codes. But anyway, I'm going to try to make this meeting a little bit more pertinent to test number 2. The test number 1 grades were actually pretty good. Some people did very well. Some people kind of marginal, but it's not the end of the world. If you didn't do that well on test number 1, you still have several chances. And test number 1, in my opinion, is probably the hardest of the 5-chapter tests. So anyway, here we go. The first code is 010. So write that down somewhere or make a note of it. The first code is 010. And I'll give you the second code in just a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spend most of this meeting talking about since I'm the one that constructs the test and I take the questions from a test bank, I'm gonna open up some of the PowerPoints related to the study guides, and I'm gonna go through them, and I'm gonna try to point out some of the things that you need to know that will help you on the test, because there's 3 PowerPoints or 3 chapter PowerPoints for test number 2. And then 2 of the spotlight PowerPoints. And I'm going to go through it because it's kind of what I want to lecture about anyway. If you have a question at any time during the meeting about anything, feel free to interrupt me. You can unmute yourself and just kind of blurt out the question. It doesn't offend me. Something about nutrition or something came up, or you heard something, or somebody said something. Hopefully you're getting a grasp or concept of what good nutrition really is. I mean, I've had people tell me, wow, you talk a lot about fasting, and I've had people say too much. Well, I don't think so, because it's so important. It's so healthy for your immune system. It's very necessary. I think it's an integral part of being healthy. The 3 terms, which I mentioned on the website, that I hope you remember when you get out of this class, and these 3 terms are on the final exam. You've already had them anyway, and you know what they are apoptosis. Remember, programmed cell death, and it's pronounced apoptosis. And the last little 7-minute video we watched was autophagy, not autophagy. The guys were making a comical having a comedy routine at the beginning of that video about how to pronounce it, but it's autophagy. Think of it as autophagy, and that means self-eating. And the 3rd term, remember, is hormesis. Now, we don't have a video on hormesis, but hormesis means stress that creates strength. And fasting is stress, and autophagy is stress, but both of those are creating by dropping the glucose level. Now, this upcoming test on PowerPoints chapters 4, 5, and 6, carbohydrates and fats and proteins. I want to talk, before we get into carbohydrates, remember the 8 components of nutrition, the 8 parts of nutrition. The first 3, once again, are the food groups: fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, in no particular order. Those are the food groups. Carbohydrates, the books will tell you, and I know we've gone over this, but the books will tell you, that give you many definitions for a carbohydrate. They'll say it's fiber and it's this and that and very sugars and other things. But I think it's easier to think of a carbohydrate as a plant. A plant, any food that has plant material has carbohydrate material in it. So guys, when you join, please turn off your camcorders, because I think Delana, your camcorder's on. Okay, thank you. So remember, you can think of carbohydrates as sugars because of the way the books explain it, but I think it's better to think of them as a plant. A plant. Anything that has plant material has carbohydrates in it. Now, in relation to that, you hear a lot now, there's a big trend talking about gluten and gluten-free and avoiding gluten because some people are gluten sensitive. We've touched on this a little bit, but since it's in the chapter on carbohydrates, I'm going to give you a little simpler, what I feel like is a more accurate explanation that's not too confusing. We grow so much wheat in this country, more than any other country in the world. So much wheat that we can export it to China and Russia and to massive populations and still have a lot left for our own people. But it's become a problem. It's become such a problem that this excess wheat, we even have more wheat than we need for cows and animals that we use for meat. There's even extra beyond that. So they started putting wheat in everything. You name it. Look at the ingredients label of some of the things you buy. It has wheat in it. It's kind of shocking. Ice cream has wheat. Almost everything has wheat. All the cereals have wheat, even though it may say, check out Cheerios. It's wheat, even though you think it may be just oats, but there's wheat in it. There's wheat in literally everything. Now, wheat is not bad for you. It's easy to grow. It doesn't require, much water. That's why we can grow so much of it. But there's so much wheat that people are now becoming insensitive to wheat, or should I say sensitive to wheat, too much wheat. Too much of anything, even though that substance may be good for you, too much of it, just like with vitamins, can actually be harmful for you. And so there are degrees of this wheat intolerance. Now, bread has a lot of wheat, and wheat has protein in it. You remember, proteins are amino acids, but proteins can be in plants also. Wheat has protein in it. And gluten is a combination of some of the proteins in wheat. It's not a specific specific amino acid, but it is. Let's see, Mercy, thank you. If you take all of the amino acids or proteins in wheat and make a paste out of it, that's what's called gluten. It's kind of a gooey, kind of like Play-Doh, edible, and they put it in bread because when you heat bread, it allows bread to rise. It gives it texture, but it's a mesh of what is in wheat. Now, gluten is also in rice, but not near the degree that it is as it is in wheat. And for some people, this constant exposure to wheat can cause problems, and they develop what is called gluten intolerance. And the symptoms can be mild to severe: the bloating, abdominal pains, diarrhea, indigestion, you name it. And if it gets bad enough or serious enough, they'll give it a disease, and it's called celiac disease. And it's completely treatable by just cutting back on gluten or cutting back on wheat. And people do that a lot. And that's some people aren't sensitive to it, and some people are. I've known people that have been diagnosed with this, and they started cutting out wheat, and they started feeling better and functioning better. So you may be in that category, but trying to avoid wheat, too much wheat, is probably a good thing. So that's my little spiel on gluten. I don't avoid it because I don't think I'm sensitive to it, but kids can be affected by it also. Okay, guys, I'm going to do a little screen share, and I'm going to go through these PowerPoints. Okay, got this open somewhere. Okay, chapter 4. I'm going to show you what I think is important. Now, I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because there's 5 to go through, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each one. Okay, carbohydrates, plants. Think of it as a plant. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and read this to you. You're adults. You don't need me to sit here and read this. But you could probably answer these in a generic way. I'm going to talk about this a little bit. Whole grain. The term whole, W-H-O-L-E, doesn't really have much meaning in nutrition. It technically means it hasn't been modified too much. If you have an orange and cut it in half, is it a whole orange? Yes. Both halves are still a whole orange, even though they're half a whole orange. They put it on food labels because it sounds healthy. Whole grains, whole wheat, whole this, whole that, because it sounds healthy. It doesn't really mean anything. When they refine grains and they use water, especially wheat, but all grains fall into this category because the seeds or the kernels are very small. Then they use water in part of the refining process, and that washes away the water-soluble vitamins. So they're required to add the water-soluble vitamins back. Now remember, the water-soluble vitamins are all the B vitamins and C. And so they add them back. The minerals tend to stay in. So is it whole grain, hasn't been refined? I'd have to actually double check myself, but I think that means it hasn't been refined yet where they had to add the vitamins back versus refined grain where they had to add it back. I don't know which one is technically healthier for you. Most of the food labeling is just to get you to buy something. When they say organically grown, organic doesn't mean anything. It means containing carbon. It means used to be alive. Everything alive has carbon, and it's a basis for life on Earth. And everything that used to be alive has carbon. So everything is organic, but it just sounds healthy. So they show pictures of cereals. I eat cereals every now and then, I have to admit, but it's the labeling on some of these things. I don't know if you can see this or not. It says whole grain. It's Lucky Charms. It's mainly, I like the way they taste, but they're mainly sugar. But they'll say whole grains. They put that on there to get you to buy it. And then like on Fruit Loops, they'll say fiber and whole grain. Remember, fiber is one of the 8 components of nutrition. It's basically anything you eat that you can't digest. That's fiber. So fiber is mainly fruits and vegetables and things of this nature. So I'm not going to get into the subtle definitions of all of these different things. This is talking about carbohydrates. Remember the 3 food groups: fats, fats, carbs, and proteins. Carbohydrates provide 4 calories per gram. Protein has 4 calories per gram, and fat has 9 calories per gram. Some books will say 10 calories per gram. Gram is a unit of weight, as calories a unit of energy. So it's like comparing apples and oranges. But basically, you don't gain as much weight from carbohydrates as you do from eating fat. Although there's a big push, they talk about the low carb diet. The South Beach diet is low carb. Now remember, it's all about blood glucose. Fats and proteins don't raise your glucose level much, even though they have calories, because they're harder to change to glucose. But carbohydrates are easy to change to glucose. So those diets do work, because you eat carbohydrates and your glucose level goes up immediately, and that can cause you to gain weight unless you're active at the time. Now on carbohydrates, you can think of it as sugar if you want, but I like to think of it as a plant. They're talking about the molecular structure of the molecule. Think of it as a glucose molecule. Think of it, as a sugar molecule. Simple to complex. The more complex the molecular structure is of the carbohydrate, the more your body has to break it down. Our cells use only glucose for energy as far as carbohydrates go. So all these sugars, and there's actually 6 of them. There's 3 what are called saccharides and 3 disaccharides. These are sugars. The simplest saccharide is actually glucose. They're called monosaccharides, and that's the one that goes inside of a cell. So whatever you eat has to be broken down into glucose, and the more complex it is, the more your body has to work to break it down into glucose, and that is your blood glucose level. See, they show glucose here. That's the simplest sugar. That's what goes inside of the cell. Fructose, that's a saccharide or sugar, but it's easy to break down into glucose, but a cell can't take in fructose. Galactose, another one of the monosaccharides. Here's the disaccharides. That's two molecules. Maltose, sucrose, and lactose. Now, I don't expect you to memorize that. If you see it on your study guide, I mean, look it up. Maltose is a sugar. It sounds like malt. And that's actually in the old-timey days, back in my days, that in the 70s and 80s, even before that, in the 50s and 60s, actually, I'm not that old, but 50s and 60s, they would have what are called malt shops, where kids would go and hang out, and they would actually make malts using the sugar disaccharide maltose. Now, you can go now, and if you order a malt, I would be very surprised, even though it says malt, if they use maltose. I bet, because maltose is very expensive compared to the other sugars. That's the difference between a milkshake and a malt. And a malt, to me, tastes much better if it's a true malt, and they actually use maltose. Next time you order a malt, ask them if they actually use this. They probably don't know what you're talking about, but anyway. Complex carbohydrates, poly means many, saccharides, think of it as sugar. It's just complex molecules strung together, and it's harder for your body to break all these down because it has to break them down into single units into glucose. And so one of the ways to think of this is mono means one, di means two, poly means many. So the more you have, then the harder it is for the body to break them down into glucose. Glycogen, once again, is stored glucose. Your glucose level drops in your bloodstream, and after about 7 or 8 minutes, you would die if it went to 0, but your body doesn't let that happen because glucose is stored in the liver in the form of glycogen, and it's also stored in your muscles in the form of glycogen. Glycogen is stored glucose. The muscle glycogen serves only the muscles itself because it can't get into the bloodstream. The liver glycogen can be put in the bloodstream, the glucose can, and go to your whole body. But you have about 2 months, 60 days worth of glucose stored between your liver and your muscles. 60 days worth. Not 6 days, not 2 days. So you will die of starvation if you don't eat after about 60 days. I'm not recommending that, but that's the human body is designed to function like that. There's just overwhelming evidence that that is actually the way to go. Now, when I think of fruits and vegetables, this is kind of mind-boggling to some people because they don't understand this. If you tell them fruits are not a food group and vegetables are not a food group, they want to argue with you. What do you mean? That simply means you don't need fruits and you don't need vegetables. Now, avoiding both would not be good. But fruits, remember the food group is carbohydrates, which are plants. Fruits are carbohydrates, so are vegetables. So you need something, but then so are nuts, and so are seeds and other things that have carbohydrates in them. So when they talk about simple carbohydrates, I think of fruits because the sugars are sweet and easy to break down. But when they talk about complex carbohydrates, the molecules are more strung out. There's more of them linked together. I think of vegetables, and grains fall into that category. Legumes, which is also a plant, would fall into the complex carbohydrate group. I'm not going to get into photosynthesis, the anatomy of various things. One interesting, talking about digestion. Let's take bread, for example. Digestion of bread actually begins in the mouth. There's a couple of enzymes that are released, amylase being one of them, that actually help with the salivary glands begin the digestion of bread as soon as it's in your mouth. It's kind of odd to think that digestion actually begin there. I can get in a lot of detail here. This is not an anatomy class. This is a nutrition class. Basically, on the GI tract, gastrointestinal tract. I mean, it goes from your mouth, esophagus, to the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and out. So what happens? What's the main role of the stomach? Very little digestion occurs in the stomach. Some. But the main role of the stomach is the breaking down of proteins into amino acids, because that requires very strong acids like hydrochloric acid and pepsin and some other things to break down break down proteins into amino acids. The stomach, it's not really a storage device like you would think of. It stores to a degree, but it's mainly digestion of protein. Most of the nutrients that you eat are absorbed into the bloodstream through the small intestine. That's where most of the absorption occurs. So you go from the small intestine, you've got about 30 feet of small intestine and about 6 feet of large intestine. The large intestine, there's a little bit of digestion that occurs there, not like in absorption, not like there is in the small intestine. But in the large intestine, one of the main functions of the large intestine is to absorb water into the bloodstream. Most of the water that your body uses is absorbed from the large intestine. It does some other things too, but it's kind of interesting to think that occurs there. They get into the details of how things get into your bloodstream. See, this is the small intestine cells, intestinal cells, and how they diffuse into the bloodstream. This is at the capillary level. Monosaccharides, sucrose, maltose. Oh, that's not the monosaccharides. Monosaccharides are glucose. Anyway, this is a capillary level. I'm still fascinating by capillary levels are so incredibly thin that at the thinnest level you can only have one red blood cell go through a capillary. It's quite amazing. Some people are lactose intolerant. Lactose is one of the it's a disaccharide. It's one of the 6 sugars. It's in milk. Most people are lactose intolerant to a degree. They may not be aware of it, but it's to a really high degree among certain ethnicities, especially Asians. They tend to be more lactose intolerant, and it comes and goes at various stages of your life. We had talked about this. Glucose is the primary fuel for cells, stored as glycogen. Too much, it ends up in fat cells. That's true with any food. Your body doesn't want to waste the food. If you overeat, your body doesn't want to waste it. So what it does, it doesn't just send it through your small intestine, large intestines, and out. That'd be nice. You go, wow, I can overeat and it's not going to be stored. Your body doesn't want to do that. So it puts it in fat cells because it's anticipating later on at some point in your life you won't be eating for a while. And the fat cells will supply energy. But we don't really do that. We just kind of store it and don't go periods of time where we fast, and it just kind of hangs around in fat cells too long. Fat cells are designed by nature for a reason, because humans through evolution had periods of time, weeks, where they couldn't eat, but they didn't starve to death, hence the evolution of fat cells. It goes in a little bit more detail. High blood glucose and low blood glucose. High blood glucose for an extended period of time is, remember, diabetes. At some point, they test you and it stays high, you're diabetic. Low blood glucose is not diabetes. It is called hypoglycemia, low blood glucose. As I mentioned before, it's probably occurred, but I'm not aware of anybody dying from hypoglycemia. Your body just won't let it happen. It may let you pass out, but you will recover. Probably somewhere somebody has, but hyperglycemia tends to be the problem. Glucose level, remember, it needs to oscillate up and down, up and down. That's what keeps you healthy. Low blood glucose. We've talked about this to a degree, so I'm not going to repeat all of this. Charts, which not that big on charts. Talk about dental caries. Dental caries, to me, caries means a dental disease. A cavity is a cavity. they're using these terms synonymously, so we'll go with that. So a cavity. Um, we haven't gotten to this point in the class yet, but I think you'll have your eyes opened when you watch the video on fluoride that's coming up later. I've studied that a lot. I avoid it religiously. If you I don't know if this particular one right here, but the brown spots, the staining on the teeth, the white spots, that is not caused by calcium. That's caused by fluoride in the water. And a lot of cities add fluoride intentionally to their drinking water. When you watch the video, it's called Poison on Tap, Fluoride, the controversy and how that all came about and why people still do it, you will be shocked. It's banned in most countries. Only I think at this time fluorosilicic acid or fluorosilicic acid. So you actually have to watch that to get all the details of what's going on there. Artificial sweeteners, in my opinion, aren't bad. They may give you a headache, but I've never heard anybody dying from them. Avoiding the calories, I think, would be good, versus having the sugar in it or etc. But then the sugar is not bad for you. It's just too much of it is high in calories. And yes, artificial sweeteners do have chemicals in them, but most of them have been tested. There were problems with a few in the beginning, but I think most of them are probably okay now. And they go through all of that. I'm not big on these recommendations. You notice they always say per day. Like, how much fiber do you need per day? You don't need any per day. You need a certain amount over time. Fiber is anything you eat you don't digest. This means on the average. This is what you need on the average. So don't get hung up on RDA. RDA means recommended daily allowance. Nutrition, DRI, dietary reference index. That's what you should go by. Believe it or not, the best example of how if you have kids or deal with kids, is listen to your kids. I know that sounds absurd. I'm talking about 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds. If you really pay attention to them when they're not causing problems, they'll actually tell you when it's appropriate time for them to eat, because they don't have a desire to eat at 3 meals a day unless they're actually hungry. And very often kids are not hungry at, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And there's this thing called pica. You don't need to know this. If any females that have ever been pregnant probably can tell you stories about this. We have a craving for something really weird during pregnancy. Anybody want to share that? Has anybody ever had that before? Any pica where you just felt like you had to eat something during pregnancy? It actually applies not just during pregnancy. It's a very specific term during pregnancy, but it applies to food in general by anybody. During pregnancy, women will sometimes crave, believe it or not, eating dirt or hair, non-nutritious things, or they'll say, oh, I want a peach for some reason, or I want a lemon. Kids have pica too. Out of the blue, and you have it too, you may not be aware of it, just out of the blue, you may say, God, I feel like eating an apple for some reason, or a peach, and you don't know why. They've actually studied this and found that there are phytochemicals, remember the chemicals in plants, and certain vitamins that your body has a way of sending signals to your brain telling you to eat something. You can have this for chocolate every now and then. They studied that. That's called pica. And so avoiding it all the time, I don't think would be a good way to go. Kids, a kid out of the blue may just say, 4-year-old, like, and I suck on that lemon for a while. Well, there's some proteins and amino acids in lemons that they might actually be deficient in. So to a degree, listen to your body. Now you can't say, I'm walking to 7-Eleven and have pica for a chocolate bar every single day. Well, the phytochemicals in chocolate, yeah, but not every single day. That's probably more just an urge than anything else. But to a degree, I would listen to it with listen to the kids and say, if they don't want something or they do want something within reason, they'll actually tell you certain things. There were studies that actually verify this. One particular study looked at kids that are allowed to eat anything they want, when they wanted. This study went over, I think, 12 weeks, and another control group and another group that ate 3 meals a day. Everything was portioned, the perfect amount. At the end of the study, the ones that were allowed to eat anything they want were just as healthy as the ones that ate the controlled food. What happened was the kids ate a lot of chocolate and candy at first, then they got kind of sick of it, and they kind of migrated back to other foods on their own. But what the difference was, though, in the ones that were allowed to eat when they wanted, they did not eat 3 meals a day. The kids naturally ate once or even twice a day, and some days wouldn't eat at all. And that's interesting that study would actually show that. And you can, establish any sort of, value to that study that you want, but I think it's interesting. Okay, remember, fiber is anything you eat that you don't digest. Soluble. You don't need to read all this. It means it dissolves in water. You put it in water, it dissolves. Insoluble, you put it in water, it doesn't dissolve. We're mainly water. So insoluble, yeah, you need it, but we need soluble too. Insoluble tends to pass through your system a little bit quicker. Soluble absorbs a little bit, but you need both. They talk about the fiber contents in foods. Plants have a lot of fiber, so carbohydrates have a lot of fiber because we don't digest all of plant material. Protein has a little bit of fiber. Fat, not much, a little bit. We tend to digest, unfortunately, most of the fat that we eat. Okay, guys, that's all on this particular one. So I'm going to look at the next one. I can figure out how to get out of this. Give me a second. Anybody have any questions on this one? Okay. So took longer on that than I wanted. So give me 1 second. So it is, yeah, carbohydrates, fats, lipids, fats, and then proteins. So let's go through this one fairly quickly. You have these, if you want to download these and keep them, they're on the website in one of the modules. You can use these on the test too. I mean, they're PowerPoint slides, but the study guides are more helpful than these. These help some, but the study guides are more specific. So 1 second. Let me do a screen share. Too many tabs open. Okay, the fats. Oh, hold on. From the beginning. Okay, lipids, fats. Is fish really brain food? There's no such thing as brain food. The whole thing on fish is now. This is also why I don't get in a lot of detail as far as memorizing the exact molecular structure of all these different molecules, the fats and the carbohydrates and the proteins, because it's just a lesson in futility. It's interesting, but it doesn't really mean you know nutrition. I think it's more important to understand the concepts. So I'm gonna explain fats. Lipids kind of the same way I explain proteins. Fats are made up of fatty acids. Fatty acids are individual molecules when strung together make a complex fat. Cells are small. Cells have to take in small things. So the fat, the complex fat, has to be broken down into little fatty acids. The cell takes it in, your cell takes it in, and it makes the type of fats that it needs. It knows what to make. So you need to supply the fats, and the body will break it down, and they circulate around, and the cells take in very small things. It can't take in complex fats. So the more complex the fat is, the more energy your body and the more stress that your body has to use to digest it. So that's what you get in the terms like Mono. Mono means, what number is mono?
1.
1. Poly means many.
Yeah.
Di means 2.
2.
Exactly. So mono, and remember, saturated means that when you put it in water, it dissolves. Unsaturated means you put it in water and it doesn't dissolve.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to fats, there's several ways you can actually think about this. But when it comes to fats, I want you to think of it like this: if you take some butter out of your fridge and leave it out overnight, and then the next morning it's all melted at room temperature, that's considered unsaturated. That means it's not quite as many calories and it's a little easier for your body to digest. Now, if it hasn't melted, then it's saturated. So it's a little bit higher in calorie and it has more fatty acids, because the more fatty acids it is, then the more solid it is. So mono is best, poly means a bunch, but unsaturated means good. It means it melts at room temperature. So if unsaturated is good and poly means a bunch, this would be a bunch of a good kind of fat. Now, don't try to analyze that too much. Just remember, fats take in fatty acids. And the way they label it at the grocery stores is so deceptive. It's just misleading people all over the place, on everything, kind of like the news media does on a lot of things. That's why you just got to become informed yourself. I don't even read the labels when it says low in cholesterol, low in fat, reduced fat, fat-free. There's all these terms they use. It's not butter, it's margarine, it's parquet, it's a spread. It's so confusing. One thing they cannot lie on, keep this in mind, when you're buying something, if you're trying to cut down on calories, and cutting down on calories is good. I don't care if you're normal weight or overweight, it's good for both people. Telling somebody overweight that they need to cut down on calories, that somebody normal weight doesn't need to cut down on calories, is ridiculous. That's like saying, well, you're overweight, you need to exercise, but I'm normal weight, I don't. No, exercise is good for both people. Now, a little common sense would apply there, that if you don't need to cut down too much if you're normal weight, because you don't want to become anorexic, but reduce calories. Calorie restriction is not starvation. And starvation is a totally different issue. And remember, and I've mentioned this before, people kind of don't like the way I explain this, but this is an accurate way to explain it. They'll talk when somebody's thin, they talk about not eating for a couple of days, being unhealthy. That's incorrect. It is healthy. They talk about anorexia. Remember, the two main eating disorders, I'm getting off the subject a little bit here, but remember the two main eating disorders, there's actually 12, but there's two main ones, are anorexia, that's where you just don't eat enough food, the starvation, and bulimia, where you eat and throw it back up. Anorexia is worse than bulimia. Bulimia is grosser. You'll die from bulimia, could damage the trachea, or your esophagus, not the trachea, but anorexia, you can die. But when you tell somebody this, and try this sometime, tell them anorexia is not an eating disorder. They'll go, what? What do you mean it's not an eating disorder? Anorexia nervosa, which is what it's called, is a body image disorder. Once again, usually women, it can be men. If you look in a mirror and you're a grown woman and you weigh 80 pounds and you look in that mirror and you think you're overweight and you really believe you're overweight, they believe it. That's not to do with eating, that's body image. That's something that's messed up in the psyche of that person. And you say, I need to lose weight, then it starts with body image, it's a psychological thing. It manifests itself by not eating, which makes it worse. So to me, be happy with the body you have. It's possible to be overweight and be healthy. It's possible to be thin and not be healthy. Now, if everybody could be perfectly thin, that'd be ideal. But remember, weight is about 80 to 90% set by heredity. And that's true for kids too. Don't blame a kid for being overweight because of their eating. It's mainly heredity. Eating affects it. The kids, they get paranoid about that. And they get subconscious, like, I can't eat, and eating becomes punishment. No, that's not the way to go. If you have a child that's overweight, try spreading the meals out more. Be careful, because you don't want Child Protective Services to come visit you. Instead of eating 3 meals a day, go to 2. Just go to 2 meals a day. Try to spread them. Remember, one of the 3 food groups. I'm not going to get into the real details of all the molecular things going on with the fats. So let me go through this. Oh, I wanted to touch on fish. You hear fish are good for you. So we put a little fish here. Anyway, professors are actually paid to do this, to put food together and make a picture of a brain. It's amazing. But that's what they do. So anyway, guys, I hear somebody's microphone in the back, so please mute your mics. There's many types of fats. There's a group of fats called omega fatty acids. I'm sure you guys have heard of those. There's two main categories called omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. Now, our bodies cannot make certain types of fats. We can eat them, but there's certain enzymes that are missing. There's a group of omega fatty acids our body doesn't make that are contained in fish, in high quantities in fish. So that's where this thing about eating fish, it has omega fatty acids, omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids. But then again, you can get them from many other sources. What I've seen is there's no credible evidence that taking these fish oil supplements and etc. actually has that much of a benefit. Some say it does, some say it doesn't. If you watch that video, Vitamania, that might have opened your eyes a little bit, kind of what's going on there. I don't think it's harmful to do it, but anybody have a question on that, on fish? Has anybody ever heard that before? Take omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I wouldn't say don't do it, but I don't expect miracles when it comes to that. If you're at the end of the day, if you're, say, oh, I'm trying to not eat for today to get some benefit, and you say, I haven't had any omega-3s, and you fry up a bunch of fish and eat it thinking that's healthier than not eating, I think you're missing the point on the fatty acids. But anyway, moving on. So, okay, I had it wrong. No, I think I mentioned this. The number of calories in fats, 9 calories per gram. Kilo means food calorie, not 1,000. I said either, some books say 10, some say 9. So you gain more weight by eating fat than you do other foods. That doesn't mean it's bad for you. That's why bears that fast eat a lot of fish. It gets to the point where a giant grizzly bear will gorge itself on so much fish or trout that pretty soon they just, I know this sounds gross, but they just eat the brains of the fish because they're so high in fats. That's a lot of fish. But nature knows how to do it. Okay, more on the fats. Now, dietary means fats that you eat. All the fats are broken down into fatty acids. Now they break the fats down into these different categories, but these are just really fatty acids that are put together. Don't try to analyze this too much. You arrange things a certain way and you get a certain shape or a certain type of fat. At the smallest level, they're all fatty acids. This is how complex they can get. Wow, incredibly complex. I don't think it's necessary to know all that, but that's what they are. Trans. Now, if there is such a thing as a bad food, this would be it. If starving to death, I would eat it anyway. Trans, now poly means many. I think of trans as like a train. A train has a whole bunch of cars. And trans fats are not, very few occur in nature. There's some, but they're mostly man-made. And they're made when you add heat to cooking oil. The fats don't break apart, they link together, and that creates what are called trans fats, which we've discussed before. French fries, anything you fry with oil creates trans fats. Now, what that means is now your body's got to break them down and use all this energy to get to the little fatty acids. So there's more stress with the trans fats. I wouldn't say is it good or bad for you, although if you eat them constantly, yes, then it can be a problem. If I were starving to death and somebody gave me a bunch of French fries, I would eat it because it's going to keep you alive. So don't try to analyze it too much, whether it's good or bad for you. Try, What number is tri? 3.
Yeah.
So triglycerides are 3 fatty acids. See,
Yeah.
3 fatty acids linked together. These are all the different sources. Complex lipids. Cholesterol is a type of fat. Its function is different. We need it in our body. There's a section later on we're going to get into cholesterol and what the readings mean when you go to the doctors, like your cholesterol level and things like that. But I can spend a lot. If you see it on your study guide, you can look this up. That it gets very complex. Chylomicrons are types of fats, but they're the very large molecules, and they're absorbed directly into the lymph system. That's what your lymph system does. If they mention it here, yeah, carried around in your lymph system. This is a type of cholesterol. LDL is another type of cholesterol. That's the low density. Yeah. That's the bad cholesterol. HDL is the good cholesterol. HDL, believe it or not, are the big pieces of cholesterol. LDL are the little pieces. You can say, oh wow, why are the little pieces worse than the big pieces as far as blocking up arteries? Let me give you an example on that. Think if you're driving your car on the road and the road surface is like the inside of an artery and your car has a little tire. So, and you go through a hole and you have a little tire. Your car, your tire is just going to stop right in the hole. But if you have a big tire, it's going to roll right over the hole. This is actually what happens inside arteries. Little pieces of cholesterol, because arteries are not completely smooth. They lodge in indentations and they start forming up and build up and they form plaque. It's called plaque now, and plaque is very sticky. If you have a lot of big pieces, then they don't tend to stick in the little holes, and they eventually go back to your liver and the body gets rid of it. So that's why the little pieces are worse than the big pieces. It's kind of the opposite of what you might think. And there's what are called VLDL, very little. It's very low actually. And there's VHDL, very high density lipoproteins. And see, these are the sizes, the big ones, chylomicrons, and on down. It's a whole continuum. There's not just 4 types. It's like saying there's 4 temperatures. Cholesterol pieces come in all sizes, and we'll get into more detail on that later. Okay, guys, I'm going to end this one, and I'm going to go through one more PowerPoint, but I'm going to give you the second code real quick here. We've got maybe 10, 15 more minutes left. Okay, everybody ready? The second code is 345. One more time. The second code is 345. Now I want to briefly go over the third one, which is proteins. Okay, proteins. Proteins are made of what? Amino acids. Your body has 20 amino acids that you use, and we've talked about this a little bit before, so I know it's a little bit of a review. If you have 20 cards, let's say you're playing cards, and you have 20 cards, how many different ways can you arrange them? Well, that number is called actually 20 factorial. It has a little factorial. It looks like an exclamation mark. That's a real number. What that number would be is 20 times 19 times 18 times 17, all the way down to 1. That runs into the quadrillions. So even with only 20 amino acids, how many proteins can you make? Quadrillions of types of proteins. If I have 3 things, an apple, an orange, and a pear, how many ways can I arrange them? That would be called 3 factorial, little exclamation mark. What that would mean is 3 times 2 times 1, which would be 6. I can arrange them 6 different ways. And that's not much with 3, but when you have 20 amino acids, you can make a lot of proteins. Proteins function mainly by shape. We can use them for food, but our bodies are also built out of protein because things have shapes. Nature has hundreds, if not 500 or 1,000, I'm not sure of the exact number of amino acids. So we don't use all the amino acids in nature. We don't. Some animals use different amino acids than we do. 9 of the amino acids are essentials. Essential nutrition means it's essential that you eat it. 11 your body can make. So there are 9 amino acids that you have to attain from your diet. Remember, essential means you have to eat it. 4 functions of proteins were made out of proteins. They also regulate pH level in the body. That's acid-base balance. They're used for food. They're used for structure. They're used for all kinds of things. And there's not just 4 functions. There are literally hundreds of functions. However, if your study guide says that, then you can look it up in your book, or you can look it up in the PowerPoints. I think you could find most of the answers on the study guide in these PowerPoints, actually. I haven't tried to find all of them, but I bet you could. What that means is you didn't need the book, you just have the PowerPoints. You're probably thinking, why didn't he tell me that earlier? Because I didn't know earlier. Most athletes eat way more protein than they need. That's true. Taking extra protein doesn't build muscle. We've talked about that. Muscles are made out of protein, but just like anything else, you don't need extra even if you work out all the time. To be deficient in protein is virtually impossible. It's a disease called kwashiorkor. It's very rare. It's almost unheard of in this country. Worldwide, it's still very rare. Kwashiorkor is protein deficiency. It means kids that have it will have a distended stomach because they have fluid retention in the stomach and edema. That's different than marasmus. Remember, marasmus is starvation, involuntary. So marasmus is not enough food. Kwashiorkor, spelled with a K, is not enough protein. You could have both. Anorexia and marasmus are the same thing, but anorexia is voluntary. You're choosing not to eat. See, it says protein. All of these things, we're made out of protein. Our body's mainly protein and minerals. That's what we're built out of. All these different roles that proteins do in the body. Look at the structure of proteins, and that's a simple structure. They're extremely complex. Extremely complex. Proteins function by shape. Now they can fold and unfold, kind of like Lego building blocks. You can put them together and make all sorts of things. They found out that certain proteins do one thing when they have one shape, and they change shape and do something different. And that's what's called folding and unfolding of proteins. Many diseases related to proteins not folding or unfolding incorrectly. And that's a lot of autoimmune diseases are related to that. Go back to the at 7. As you go down the pH scale, it's more acid, more acidic. As you go up the scale, it's more alkaline or base. Something like vinegar, pure vinegar has a pH really alkaline. I don't know exactly what it is. It's way up here. Hydrochloric acid has a pH like a 1.5. It's very acidic. The stomach acid level, I think, is about 1.5, close to 2. It's very acidic because it has to digest protein. So no food that you eat technically can give you stomach acid because your stomach's already at 1.5. So even if you eat something really acidic, like I can't think of anything, but I don't know, lemons, which have a pH of like 2.5, it actually can't make your stomach any more acidic. Usually the stomach acid, heartburn, that kind of stuff, that's caused by eating too much food. Now, certain foods can trigger it in certain people. Like for me, pizza will do that. Sometimes chicken will do it. Milk tends to cause people to have heartburn or stomach acid. It's not lowering the acid level of your stomach. It's just there's some complex things going on. One of the best things you can do when you get this is to drink a lot of water. Now, you probably don't feel like doing that because you're already having heartburn, but water dilutes the acid in the stomach. It takes 30 minutes or so. Drink a whole glass of water, and you'll notice about 30 minutes later, like your heartburn's starting to go away. but you probably got the heartburn by eating too much. So the thought of just drinking water and filling your stomach up is like, I don't want to do that. But it actually works. Now you can take things like Tums and Rolaids. Be careful about having a lifestyle of doing that, because then you get used to doing that. I'm going to overeat and take some Rolaids and overeat, and it's not a natural way to lower the pH of the body. And some of those things actually have aluminum in them. That helps lower the pH, but there's no function for aluminum in the body, and too much can cause problems. Okay, proteins are amino acids linked together. They form very complex chains that have shapes. Di means 2, tri means 3, poly means a bunch. 9, we've already talked about this. You have to eat them. 11, your body can make them. I used to make students memorize the names of all the amino acids, but once again, that's complex. And it's, once again, just memorizing for memorization. Albert Einstein had a great quote. He said, never memorize something you can look up. Don't waste your brain cells. And I believe that. If you can look it up, don't just memorize it. You need to understand what they do, but don't just memorize a bunch of names. Now, your cells take in the amino acids and they make their own proteins. They know what to make. They're made in this structure called the ribosome of the cell. It makes proteins. It takes in the amino acids, links them together, and makes what it needs to rebuild itself. Now, it can actually release these proteins back into the bloodstream to be taken up by other cells. But on that video on autophagy, sometimes you get misfolded proteins and waste products inside the cell that weren't put together correctly. And autophagy, self-eating, is where the body takes these waste products and recycles them. The ribosome makes the proteins. The lysosome is kind of like the guts or the wastebasket of the cell. We'll take these waste products and recycle them. It makes the cell healthier. Remember, that's what autophagy is, self-eating. Cell doesn't eat itself. It eats the waste products. It's like emptying the trash out. And that too occurs at a high level during fasting. And denaturation means breaking down of the protein. Cooking. I don't think it's a controversial statement, but I stand by it. Most people agree with it. Some don't. I've had some that even teach nutrition say that's incorrect. That's fine. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. But if you keep the big picture in mind and be reasonable about it, adding heat to any food that you eat doesn't mean the food is unhealthy. But what it means is it's not as healthy as if it were raw. Now what they're showing here is an egg. And I haven't looked at this PowerPoint, but I know exactly what they're going to say. This author is probably going to contradict what I'm telling you. When you cook an egg, it releases biotin and iron. You have heat. Those two things are released. Biotin, one of the B vitamins, and iron. But you're probably not low in those anyway. So this may be the one exception, but then again, adding heat breaks down the proteins into specific amino acids, but your body does that naturally anyway. Raw anything is healthier than cooked anything. Now, doesn't mean cooked things are bad for you. Once again, don't confuse that with sanitation. I would never go to a restaurant and order rare because I don't trust where they've been storing the meat, what's been going on, especially with all the viruses and everything else. But if it's safe and sanitary, if you knew exactly what heat did to food, nature cooks nothing. Nature tells us is the way to eat. There are all kinds of studies on people that eat raw meat, sanitary, etc., and talk about the health benefits and etc. And there's all kinds of recipes for that too. But it's just not something people think about much. Now they're going into the types of amino acids, what happens. Like I said, I'm not going to get into all the details on this. You could have a whole course just studying one particular amino acid. Literally, you could, a whole course. Not a whole course on proteins, a whole course on one amino acid. It's that complex. I'd rather you understand the concept. Of the three food groups, protein is unique because it's the only one that contains the element nitrogen. And nitrogen is what regulates pH balance and some other things in the body. Negative nitrogen balance means you have trouble with wound healing and things like that. If you have surgery and they've done some cutting on you, then you probably have a negative nitrogen balance and need some more protein in that instance. Your athletes need more protein. You don't need to plug in this formula. Answer is no. So why would muscle cells don't use protein or amino acids? Muscle cells use glucose. They're made out of protein, but it's just virtually impossible to be deficient. Is it bad to have extra protein? No. You lose weight by doing that, by the way. Protein shakes and things of that nature, because they're hard. Protein's hard to change to glucose. So those kind of diets actually work. So I think in terms of losing weight, yes, it's fairly beneficial. Then they go into now how much you need per day. Once again, per day. That's the way they look at things. Protein intake, dietary protein. I think sometimes these authors they want to fill up a lot of pages. I mean, it looks really nice and neat, but I mean, you understand the concepts. Oh, this is kwashiorkor. Yeah, here it is, kwashiorkor. The distended belly due to edema. Edema just means swelling. Sometimes it's due to parasitic infections. It's really sad. The term malnutrition, mal in Espanol is bad. So bad nutrition. Most people say malnutrition. I think this book has it wrong because I know what they're talking about. They're talking about undereating. Mal means bad. Overeating is malnutrition too. Not just undereating, but they're really talking about starvation here. And so, because I can tell by the countries they're pointing to, like a malnutrition, where is it occurring? If you included overeating, the good old US of A would not be 2.3%. No way. It'd be closer to 30%. So they should actually call this malnutrition related to undereating or not enough food. It's such a deceptive thing. All of North America is 2.3%. So you take all of this in Canada, Greenland, and say, wow, this is the healthiest people in the world. No way. Maybe up here, not so much in the US. And you get over here to some of the Asian countries, and you say, oh, wow, look, it's really horrible. It's hard to tell where these things fall exactly. Like Japan is over here somewhere. And they have it at 25.8%. Are you kidding me? The Asian countries tend to be much healthier as far as nutrition goes. They're implying that North America is much healthier than the Asian countries. I don't know. These charts, just because it's a chart in a book, I don't necessarily buy it. Just remember, mal means bad. It helps with weight loss. They've already talked about that. See what else is important in this. Okay, guys, we're almost through. Okay. So, yeah, it took about an hour. Okay, so guys, the third code is 212. Has everybody got that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, guys, you can always message me.
Professor?
Yes, any questions?
What was the second code? I don't think I ever heard it.
Okay, I'm going to give you the three codes once again. First code is 010. Second code is 345. Third code is 212. So if you have any questions during the next week or two, message me. I'll always respond to the messages. Okay, guys?
Okay. Yes, sir.
All right, guys, have a good evening. I will see you later.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.